Awesome. All right, you guys, let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Dr. Teresa Cal. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Brian DeLusag, who's a licensed clinical social worker. And the both of us work in the intensive outpatient programs at Mission Hospital, both for the adolescent intensive outpatient program called Aspire and the young adult intensive outpatient program called Vibe. And so in these two programs, we focus a lot on mindfulness, which we're going to be talking about today. But before we dive into any of that, I wanted to discuss a few housekeeping items before we get started. One, as you guys probably have noticed, just as a disclaimer, we are currently live on YouTube, just so that you guys are aware of that. The other thing is that this webinar, because it is a webinar, it's one directional. So that means that you guys are able to see and hear us on video and audio, but we're not able to see or hear you, and that's why you guys also don't see each other or hear each other. But what we do ask for you guys to do, because we'd like to have a lot of participation in this discussion today, that you use the chat box to ask us any questions and respond to any questions that we're asking you, okay? Also, we wanted to remind you guys that we do have a raffle. So 8 lucky winners who are participating today will be drawn at random. So you guys have the opportunity to win a $25 Amazon gift card. Each of the 8 winners gets one. And to do that, we ask that you guys stay to the end of the webinar and complete the post-webinar survey. So when we exit out of our presentation today and out of Zoom, you guys will have a pop-up screen that has the post survey that has only like a couple questions on it. It should take you 10 seconds to fill out. So hopefully you guys can do that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we jump in is that this is our second to last webinar of the Understanding Mental Health series. We have one more next month, the first Tuesday on May 4th at 6 p.m. And I provided you guys the registration link in the chat box for you guys to register for that one. And we're going to be discussing how to talk about mental health with loved ones, because we know that a lot of times with loved ones, that topic is really taboo. So it's just going to be like a really good conversation about how we do that and how we talk about mental health, whether it's our own, whether it's someone else's, and how to approach that conversation. Okay, so let's get started. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking about mindfulness and what it's all about. I actually wanted to take a poll real quick. Let me see if I can do this. Shoot, I think I have to exit this, and I want to take a poll to see where you guys are at with all of these things. Actually, it's not showing up. Never mind about that. If you guys can just write in the chat box, how much do you guys know about mindfulness? Like a little bit, a lot, not at all, just so that we can get an idea of where you guys stand with this concept, with this practice. So if you guys can just type in the chat box. Okay, good amount, a little bit. Nice. 50-50, nice. A little bit, stuff that's been promoted by yoga or apps. Cool. All right. Okay. Cool. Thanks, you guys. Yeah, that just gives us an idea about where you're all at. And it seems like you guys are all here to learn today. So thanks for joining us. So as I mentioned to you guys before, Ryan and I both help run these two programs, the Aspire program and the Vibe program, both intensive outpatient programs. And in these programs, we talk a lot about focus on dialectical behavior therapy. And it's a type of therapy that really focuses on behavior change and acquiring skills, coping skills to deal with day-to-day stress and depression and anxiety and relationships and things like that. And so mindfulness is actually a really, really core skill that we focus on that helps build on all the other skills. So let's go ahead and go back to this here. And when we talk about mental health, mindfulness is a really critical part of mental health. Just think about it this way. If you didn't know exactly what's going on for you, what problems you might have, and you're kind of clueless and have not necessarily any idea, but there are problems that are going on, it's really hard to fix, right? It's really hard to identify what needs to change. Whereas mindfulness is the ability to increase that sense of awareness about what's going on for you in order to make changes. And that's kind of it in a nutshell, but let's get into talking a little bit more about what it is. Mindfulness essentially is this concept. It's a concept, so it can be a noun. It's an adjective because it's like a state of being, and it's also a verb because it's an action. Being mindful, things that we're doing. So it's really all encompassing. So mindfulness is really about being fully aware and in tune with what's going on for us any given moment, right? Being aware of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what are physiological sensations, and just overall what we're experiencing from moment to moment. And it takes a lot of engagement in what we're actually doing in order to be mindful. So that's why it's a practice, and that's why we're hoping today to kind of help you get started in your practice of mindfulness. And also being able to stay focused on one thing at a time. I think a lot of people tend to get very distracted sometimes. It's hard to concentrate on whether it's work, whether it's school, whether it's even in a conversation with someone else, just focusing on what they're saying. And so mindfulness is really the practice of being in tune, staying engaged, being really intentional about what is happening in that moment for you. And essentially, it's the opposite of being autopilot, right? I think everyone is kind of aware of what autopilot is. And if you are curious, and I'm curious, if you can type in the chat, what are some autopilot responses that we have on a day-to-day basis? Because one for me is driving, right? A lot of time, there was one time actually recently that I was driving on the freeway and I completely missed my exit. I went like 3 exits down until I actually realized that I missed my exit, right? And that's because I was distracted and thinking about other things, and I was really zoned into something else and not to driving, right? And essentially, when we're on autopilot, when we're habitual in our day-to-day practices, our day-to-day responsibilities, we're not really paying attention to what we're doing, right? And so I think a lot of times practicing mindfulness helps us to kind of relearn different things that we're doing, but in a more effective way. So let me check the chat here to see what you guys said. Hold on 1 second. Okay, enjoy driving, criticizing myself, following a conversation. Yeah. Someone says, enjoy your meal. You too. Yeah. So just like those common phrases that we kind of just say to one another, right? Eating, absolutely. Walking, eating, breathing. Yeah. We actually don't focus on our breathing quite often. And that's actually a mindfulness exercise that we'll talk about a little bit later. On the phone saying, oh yeah, cool. Sorry, what'd you say? Absolutely. That happens to me sometimes. Missing exits, missing meetings, missing appointments. Yeah. And especially when we're overly occupied, right? When we have so many responsibilities too, it's really hard to be mindful. When we're focusing on so many different tasks at once, it's very difficult. Scrolling through social media. Yeah. I thought of another one also, like brushing our teeth, putting in our contacts, just getting out of bed, just our daily routines, really mundane, and it's so routine that we're so used to it, we don't even think about it. Reading and then realizing you didn't actually read the last 3 paragraphs. That was me all throughout high school, all throughout college, even grad school. Yes, totally. So absolutely. So mindfulness is really trying to focus on the opposite of those things, right? Being really attentive as much as you can to the present moment. And it's definitely a myth that we get rid of our thoughts when we're mindful, right? I think a lot of people tend to confuse meditation and mindfulness, and Mindfulness is really not about getting rid of your thoughts, because realistically those thoughts do come, right? And if you're trying to stay focused on, let's say, a homework assignment, for example, and then you get distracted by something else, sometimes we criticize ourselves for having those thoughts, but those thoughts are okay, right? Being able to realize that, okay, those thoughts are there. I realize, I acknowledge that they're there, and let me redirect myself to what it is that I'm doing right here in the present moment, right? So Brian will also talk about later, like not judging ourselves as we're practicing mindfulness, because that's definitely, sometimes that's we get hard on ourselves when we're, getting distracted, when we're procrastinating, when we're not paying attention to things. So absolutely. Let me look at what else you guys said here. Lisa says, autopilot sometimes during Zoom class where the topic is a little boring. Yeah, it's hard to pay attention when you're not interested in something, right? Zoom fatigue turns my autopilot a little. There are stressful thoughts that I have no power over that I want to skip. Yeah, so even powerful thoughts definitely get in the way. Good discussion, you guys. Okay, so let's talk about why we even practice it. Why should we even bother practicing mindfulness, and how does it help? So one thing is that it improves your ability to respond more effectively to your experiences, right? So in the example I just mentioned, driving when I'm not paying attention to the road can be, one, actually very dangerous, right? And two, I'm not paying attention to where I need to go. And so I could have, if I was paying attention, I would have exited, right? And I would have gotten to my destination on time. Whereas because I missed my exit, I had to turn around, and then it took maybe another 10 minutes to get to where I needed to be. And so really being mindful, paying attention, staying focused, being engaged, right, and intentional with what you're doing in that moment really helps you to respond more effectively. It gives you more choices and more control over your decisions and your circumstances, right? So if you're a little bit more impulsive, right? That's what we're saying is the opposite of mindfulness. And so mindfulness essentially helps you to slow down a little bit more, think before you act, right? And then if you're able to slow down, you are able to think about more choices that you might have, more alternative solutions, rather than reacting impulsively in that moment. Okay, so same with what it says there, helps you slow down to think before acting impulsively. It reduces your emotional suffering and increases a pleasant feeling. So if you're able to notice your moment-to-moment experiences, you're able to kind of check in and see how you're feeling. You're realizing what you're thinking in that moment. You're able to notice then what you might need to help yourself work through that moment. So for example, in Aspire and in Vibe, we one of our mindfulness practices on a daily basis is to help these individuals check in with themselves, right? And I always say one of the best things you can do is to check in with yourself on a regular basis. So you ask yourself 3 questions. First and foremost, on a scale of 1 to 10, distress level, where am I at currently in this moment? Then you ask yourself, what am I feeling? What's my current mood in this moment, right? And then what am I needing to give myself in this moment? So for example, if I'm at a 7 and I'm feeling extremely overwhelmed, I'm tired and I have a lot on my plate, and so I'm just really overwhelmed, then I might need to take a break. I might need to listen to myself and go take a walk, take some deep breaths, get some water, right? Talk to a friend. So being able to be in tune with how you're doing, it reduces your emotional suffering. The more you're able to do that, the more you're able to check in with yourself, and it increases pleasurable feelings, because if you're able to listen to your needs and attend to your needs, then you're taking care of yourself, right? And that within itself can produce a little bit more positive emotions. The next thing it says, mindfulness helps you make important decisions by balancing overly emotional and overly logical decisions. So Ryan's going to discuss this next with a concept called wise mind. So basically, a lot of times when we're not being mindful, we're either very emotional and responding with our emotions, or we're responding without emotions and just with logic and black and white thinking. And so it doesn't really allow us to kind of have a balance of the two. And so wise mind is a skill that you guys can learn to really help slow down again, right? And balance those emotions and those black and white thinking that you might have. And then it helps improve your focus and attention to the present moment, as I mentioned before. It increases your compassion for yourself and others. So there's also a concept called relational mindfulness, where it's acknowledging that what I say and what I do impacts what you say and what you do, and vice versa. What you say and what you do impacts what I say and what I do. So in a relationship with someone else, being able to be in tune and pay attention to how you might be impacting the other person and how the other person might be impacting you, right? For example, if I'm mindful in my relationship, I might say, I notice that when I'm yelling while talking to you, that you shut down. Right? And if you're able to notice that a little bit more, you're more curious and less critical. You're more in tune to how the other person is also perceiving the situation, and how you're contributing to it, or vice versa, right? And then you can actually do something about it, right? So you're paying attention to what's happening in your relationship more than being impulsive and reacting, because I think we all know in our relationships, if we're really reactive, we're really impulsive, things come out and we often regret that, right? And then the last thing is mindfulness lessens your pain and your tension towards stress. Kind of all of these things that I've mentioned to you guys before. When I think about mindfulness, I think about the difference, the middle between two extremes of anxiety and depression. Okay, so anxiety, oftentimes we're focused a lot on the future and the things that we absolutely can't necessarily control, right? Or change. We're often anticipating future circumstances. We're often making up things in our heads that we don't even know is going to happen. And again, we don't necessarily have control over those things. And then there's depression, where, we're often living in the past. Anxiety is living in the future. Depression is kind of living in the past, where you're focusing a lot on the guilt, the shame, the coulda, shoulda, woulda. I should have done this. I regret not doing this, right? And oftentimes we're living there. And again, the past is not something you can change or something you can control anymore. And so what can you control? That's the current and present moment, right? You have more ability to just focus on what is in front of you and adapt to your current circumstances more readily than you can in the future or the past, right? And so mindfulness essentially helps you to do that a lot more and a lot more effectively. So I'm going to pass it on to Ryan. He's going to talk a little bit more about Wise Mind.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cow. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Delusug, a licensed clinical social worker with the Aspire and Vibe programs here at Mission Hospital. Just wanted to check if any questions so far with anything that Dr. Cow has mentioned. Just wanted to see, you can feel free to ask your questions either in the chat, or there's also a question and answer area. So if for whatever reason there's questions that come up during this, please feel free to let us know so we can address those during the presentation. So the three states of mind, there's the reasonable or reason mind, also known as the intellectual mind, the emotion mind, and the wise mind. Think about how maybe sometimes if you have kids or colleagues, maybe a friend that is heard bad news and they're kind of in this like withdrawn emotional states, they kind of seem stuck there. Or if you're interacting with someone and notice that their mood shifts all of a sudden when they interact with someone else, they go from like really quiet and really reserved to really more engaged and talkative with another person. Sometimes we have these different mindsets, and these mindsets have an impact on ourselves and the other people that we interact with. So we're going to talk a little bit about what these three mindsets are and how these kind of impact and connect with mindfulness. So the first one is reason mind or reasonable mindsets. And so this is a more logical or factual based mindset where we kind of get stuck in just logic and data. We call this more of a cool mindset. It's usually seen as a more blue color. And so this reasonable mindset tends to have more sometimes extreme thinking, all or nothing. This is where a lot of us get stuck in just kind of the day to day. So I need to go do the groceries. I'm going to go tomorrow. I have this planned and this, and this. And there's some great aspects of that to be able to problem solve and to kind of consider, our tasks and stuff. However, this type of mindset usually kind of disconnects us from people. We usually get into a logical mindset and aren't able to focus on other people's emotions or maybe not have empathy when we're in this more reasonable mindset. So we kind of are almost robotic in a sense if we're too much in this reasonable mind. On the flip side is the emotional mindset. And so this is what we call more hot and impulsive, more associated with like a red color in a sense. And so a person in a more emotional mind is easily influenced and kind of gets stuck in their emotions. They are maybe more reactionary, and so they feel their feelings are kind of facts, which is sometimes difficult, where everything we do or say has, if it feels this way, then it must be true, right? I feel stupid, and so that's fact. So this emotional mindset can be a lot more impulsive, maybe destructive in some aspects. So those are some of the cons. But on the pro side, having emotions in of itself is a very human thing. We are creatures of relations, and so having emotions is so important in connecting and to relate and understand one another, because emotions in and of itself are information. It helps us to understand what we're doing, what we're experiencing, make sense of the world around us. So the idea of both of these have pros and cons, which is why we want to try and hold them together. What we call like a dialectical perspective of both sides being true, that there's some parts where we can hold this reason and intellect and facts, as well as the emotions, and that both sides are valid, and how do we hold them together to create what we call the wise mind. So a wise mind is more of a blend of the two. It's where we're kind of seeing that, okay, I'm feeling really anxious right now, and that makes sense. And I think that I can do this, or it's probably my best interest if I do this, right? So being able to hold both sides, that we're looking at it logically and looking at it in a more rational way with emotions, and kind of taking into consideration how I'm feeling or how this maybe impacts me or impacts someone else. We're holding them together. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be 50-50, like it has to both be equal, but we're taking both sides and being able to hold a wise mind. So for example, I can think that if I'm going to make a decision on this term paper, let's, I'm really anxious about it, and I don't want to do it right now. I think this is, if we're getting stuck in our emotional, I might, panic and, run away from the paper. Whereas a more wise mind approach might be, okay, I'm really anxious, I'm really overwhelmed right now, and maybe I can at least put my name on the paper and write my introduction paragraph, right? Something that kind of holds both sides and acknowledges how you're feeling, as well as maybe a rational approach to this situation, or this person that you may be interacting with. All right. So the reason we talk about these mindsets is that sometimes these can get in the way of being mindful. And so we want to be able to use mindfulness with the wise mind in order to stay in the present moment. Like Dr. Kao was saying, if we're too emotional or getting too much in the logics or all or nothing thinking, that's normal, that happens. And how do we kind of bring ourselves back to the present moment, so we're not getting too far in the past or future, and getting involved, sucked into maybe our reason or emotional mindsets. So the way we're going to talk about that is learning about the skills. So these are some very specific skills that we practice. We teach our our teens and our young adults here in the program, and so we'll go over it with all of you. So these are the core kind of mindfulness skills. There are the what skills, what are we doing to be mindful, and the how skills. How am I going to use these skills and apply them to stay in the mindful mode. So the first thing is what we're doing is observing, describing, and participating. So we want to be able to observe and take notice of what's going on internally and externally. We'll talk a little about the different mindfulness exercises or activities that we can do. And sometimes we are going to do things that are more internal based or external based, depending on the situation, the person, what we're going through or experiencing in that moment. And so we want to be able to observe our feelings, our thoughts, using our senses. And we always want to encourage to focus on what we notice with all five senses. So when we smell, taste, hear, smell, touch, taste, hear, see, and to be able to utilize all of the senses and really just take notice. Observing is focusing on what you notice or can take into account. So rather than saying that, judging these thoughts or judging that you're, I shouldn't be thinking this way or I shouldn't have that, we want to just acknowledge, okay, so I might have had this thought and I got distracted. How do I kind of bring myself back and just observe it, take notice of that it's happening, right? The first step with all of this is the awareness building. So it's to observe. Next is to describe. And so we want to put words to these experiences, put descriptors, and be able to use facts so that we can understand the experience that we're having. So describing maybe our outside external. So for example, right now I'm in a room, it's kind of cold, and I'm sitting in a chair, the chair is soft. So you're kind of using descriptors rather than trying to judge or label it. And we'll get more into that in the how skills in a moment. But just using descriptors as to what it is that is factually that we're observing. So that I'm having a thought rather than I'm having these judgments about myself. I'm experiencing some tightness in my body, and not putting the judgment or assumption labeled with that. All right. And then finally, to participate. One of the parts with mindfulness is to really be in the moment. And we were talking about earlier how sometimes we do things not mindfully, like we're eating or driving, for example. And so to participate is to fully kind of invest and stay in the moment, whatever it is that you're doing. So for example, if you're eating, is to really put all your attention and participate and engage in the eating. A lot of the times, and I think I was reading earlier that sometimes we try to multitask, and sometimes that leads to more distractions, or we're not as effective or not as grounded in that moment because we're trying to multitask, do so many things all at once. And so the idea of mindfulness is to really just participate in the specific moment and really put our all in. If we only kind of do half, it makes it more challenging for us to really stay in the moment because we're half here and half maybe in a different time, or we're thinking about the past, the future, or half in another activity. So trying to focus and try to put as much focus into participate into the moment as possible. Then there are the how skills. So how are we doing these what skills is to not judge. And again, humans are judgmental and can be critical of ourselves and others. And so to let go of that judgment and to be able to be more neutral, at least, to try and describe the moments without those assumptions or connotations that come with it. When we start to put those labels like, oh, this cup is really ugly, or this class is really boring, we start to kind of label it into a good or not good category. And so mindfulness is to kind of let go of that and stay maybe in the middle, in a more neutral area, and to let go of that judgment, so that we're not swayed into one side or the other. We're kind of in that middle ground. So it's not that it's good or bad, but it's that, it's occurring. We maybe have this thoughts rather than, oh, I shouldn't be having these thoughts, or these thoughts are bad, or these aren't helpful thoughts. It's like, no, right now there's a thought that came up. Okay, you acknowledge it and maybe let it slide. Or how do I bring myself back to my mindfulness moment? I'm mindfully eating, or I'm mindfully going for a walk. So letting that thought come up, and you're going to let it slide and focus back on the mindfulness that you're trying to do in the moment. One mindfully in the moment, to stay focused, and that's where we're trying to do one thing at a time. Staying focused by focusing on one thing at a time, again, is helps us to stay present and to really slow ourselves down. Society, and I think most of us can agree, we try to be efficient and multitask and do so many things at once. And usually that makes sometimes matters worse. We get overwhelmed. We criticize ourselves because we aren't doing enough, or we're doing things, ineffectively. And so being able to be to stay focused and do one thing fully helps us to kind of slow down and be more intentional about what we're trying to do. Excuse me. And then finally, to be effective. And so being effective really means in doing what works for you. So for example, some of us, when we listen to music, some of us are going to more be mindful and focus on the lyrics, right? That helps us to kind of think about the lyrics and focus about, okay, they're talking about this and I can relate to that. It brings up these emotions for me. Whereas others are going to kind of, for music to be a mindfulness activity or exercise for them, is going to be focusing on the rhythm and the beats, the different, I had a colleague that's worked with different clients and patients where they could vision like colors or textures when they listen to music. So it's really doing what works for you and figuring out what is effective for you as an individual when you're engaging in these mindfulness practices. Some people are, again, more going to be internally based. They're able to kind of sit with and focus on their breathing, or they're focusing on internal sensations and do like body scans and tightness of their muscles. Whereas more others are going to be externally based. To be able to be mindful, maybe I'm going to do meditation, and I'm going to do yoga, being able to kind of go for a walk, and you're kind of focusing on the external surroundings. So finding what's effective and helpful for you in the mindfulness practice. All right. So with that, we're going to kind of go over and try and practice a couple mindfulness exercises together. So these are some examples, some different ways that we can engage in mindfulness. For example, observing and describing. We're kind of just, if you're sitting in the room right now, or in your room, maybe you're sitting in a outside, you're just taking a moment to observe and describe things around you. So, right now I can see a gray wall. There's a water bottle that says Aquafina on it. You're just going and observing and kind of describing what's happening around you. Again, the idea with some of these mindfulness practices is to stay in the present moment. And sometimes our thoughts kind of wander off, and it can help to have some kind of homing beacon, or like a lighthouse that brings you back to the moment, and to ground ourselves in the here and now, which is why a lot of people, when they do yoga, you're going to focus on your breathing and focus on how you're taking steady breaths. So doing something to kind of ground yourself, or focusing on one thing at a time, helps us to bring us back to the present moment. So I'm going to encourage everyone right now to try and practice some paced breathing. You can either follow along with me, and I'll kind of pace everyone when to take a breath in and when to take a breath out, or you can go at your own pace and maybe visualize like a balloon being inflated or deflated, or counting your breath at your own pace. Really helpful ways are doing like a 4-4, a square breathing. So you're doing 4 counts in, 4 counts out, pausing for 4 counts, and then 4 counts back in again. And or you can do like a 6-8 breathing. So you take a deep breath in for 6 counts, or out and then out for 8 counts. So what I'm going to do is practice some 6-8 breathing, and you can follow along with me. So let's go ahead and take a deep breath in. And out. In. Out. In. Out. In. Out. Good. So paced breathing is a great way to practice mindfulness. Again, you can maybe visualize something that you're inflating or deflating, focusing on counting, focus on your lungs as they expand and contract, but just really trying to focus on in the moment, on one thing at a time. There's something called progressive muscle relaxation. That's a great mindfulness exercise where you basically are tensing and relaxing your muscles. And you can do that consecutively from your toes to your legs, abdomen, shoulders to your head, or you can do one muscle group at a time just in the moment. So if you're gonna just like tense your hands really tightly, a deep breath in, and relax. You should kind of notice like a relaxing sensation, or your muscles kind of letting go of like energy. The idea is to kind of practice this and be able to just notice the sensation between tense and relaxation. Because a lot of time, we go through our day-to-day and are carrying a lot of tension in our shoulders, maybe in our lower backs. And so being able to kind of realize and understand how much tension we're carrying and trying to let it go through this exercise can be really helpful and beneficial. Some other exercises that we can do are counting backwards. So I encourage you right now maybe to count backwards from 100 by sevens. So you go 100, 93, and all the way till you get to 0. Again, the idea is to maybe pull ourselves out of the anxiety thoughts, the worries, and just focus on one thing, which is accounting. Some people, when they're in class, find it helpful to count. They're getting overwhelmed in the classroom, maybe counting the tiles that they see on the wall. Something to kind of distract themselves, pull them out of that anxiety for a moment so they can readjust and refocus. Again, the idea of the mindfulness is to just bring ourselves to the present moment so we aren't getting super overwhelmed or pulled into the mindsets of emotion or rational too much. We're trying to stay in that wise-minded sense. Some other exercises that you can do are the 5-4-3, 5-4-3-2-1. So that's using your 5 senses and noticing 5 things around you, looking at 5 things, touching 4 things, hearing 3 things, smelling 2, and tasting 1. So it can be in any order. You can use whatever senses, but being able to just kind of look at different things that you see, touch and feel. And again, the more you can objectively and use descriptors. So, I can feel this desk. It feels cold. It's fairly firm and hard. It looks, brown, and there's squiggly lines on it. So using as many descriptors to kind of pull ourselves in the moment using our 5 senses is another way to be mindful. We talked about, and I noticed again, the eating, using all 5 of our senses when we're eating. So kind of slowing ourselves down when you take that bite of an apple, maybe visualizing the apple, looking at all of the ridges and the color of it, the feeling the texture of the apple as you chew down on it, the sweet or the taste of the apple. Is it sour, sweet? And trying to, again, just be as neutral and descriptive as possible so we can stay in that present moment. Yeah, any examples or ideas that others have found useful in being mindful, or other activities that others maybe could suggest in practicing mindfulness? So I heard yoga is one. What other examples can you all think of? Meditation? Yeah. So being able to kind of just meditate. Body scan, yeah. So being able to just kind of check in with yourself, noticing what you're feeling in your body, maybe emotions, thoughts, tension. Yeah. Being able to reflect during conversation. So yeah, focusing on what was said, and rather than, I think a lot of us, what we tend to do is are present in the conversation and are already preparing, how do I respond to what they're talking about? How do I, have something good to say to what they're talking about? So kind of being just in the moment with that. Yoga and breathing. Yeah, observing the beauty of nature. So being able to kind of take a note of what we see around us, going for like a mindfulness walk in your neighborhood. Yeah, one part of mindfulness that I would challenge all of you is to, take notice of something new in your office, in your neighborhood, in your room. That helps us to kind of stay mindful. Focusing on our breath. Right. Cardio is a great way. Doing exercise helps us to really focus on, that moment rather than criticizing or other things that get in the way. Good. Writing down our thoughts. Great. So being able to journal and write down our thoughts. That is another awesome mindfulness exercise. All right. A gratitude journal. Good. Anything else, Dr. Cow?
I don't know if you had touched on the memory word game part, but I always like that one where one mindfulness exercise we do with the teens here is basically like an ABC game where, we start off like I'm going on a picnic, and each teen kind of focuses on one letter. So one teen goes, I'm going on a picnic and I'm going to bring an apple for A. Then the next teen does, I'm going on a picnic and I'm bringing an apple and a balloon, right? And so you go in order, but I think you can do that for yourself too, where, you're able to identify, an item for each thing, and you're basically tracking and kind of memorizing. So you're fully intentionally engaged in that moment to just that one thing that you're doing, which is kind of tracking your ABCs, right? Or you can just start. I remember, I'm going to give you another driving exercise because I'm rarely mindful driving, which is not very good. But in the car, you know, when I get a little bit sleepy and I feel like I'm not as focused, I will start thinking, oh, like how many states can I identify with the that start with M, right? Like how many states in the US start with the letter M or A or whatever. I'll make up something in my mind, but it's essentially anything can be a mindfulness exercise that you're really just focused on that one thing and you're engaged, right? And it's prompting you to really just focus on whatever it is that you've identified you're trying to do in that moment. So yeah.
So being more intentional and just, you know, slowing ourselves down, being more intentional with what we're doing and engaging in really is the purpose of this mindfulness.
Yeah. And I forget who asked, oh, it was Robin, I think, who asked what's the wise mind statement. So I wrote it down in there. It's what Ryan was talking about earlier, how to balance validate your emotions and come up with a rational solution. So saying to yourself, like, okay, it makes sense that I'm feeling anxious because I have a midterm tomorrow, and it's in my best interest if I start to study and I take breaks as I study so I can feel a little bit more effective or something like that, right? You're balancing the emotions and the solution of that situation. Yes, you're welcome. Okay. Anything else, Ryan? Okay, so let's just wrap up here. I wanted to, this page here is just a bunch of apps for mental health and mindfulness. I don't know if any of you guys have used these or heard about these before. Oh, how did I? Sorry. But Calm is a good one. Some of these I think I've heard that you have to purchase, but some I think you can download it for free, try it out for a little bit, and some apps let you still use it without having to purchase something. So I don't know if any of you guys have any feedback for which one of these you guys really like. You guys can drop that in the chat too to help other people.
People say Headspace is a great one, and the Insight Timer.
Mm-hmm. Headspace, gratitude is great. Headspace sounds like Headspace is a crowd pleaser. Awesome. Okay, so if you guys just want to take a quick note down of some of these apps. Courtney says, my Fitbit has a breathing exercise that helps. That's awesome. I think a lot of like exercising watches or, you know, like Apple Watches and things like that do have those things for you, which is awesome. Okay, cool. So I'm just on to the very last slide here. So these are community resources. We mentioned these also at the previous webinar. So VIBE is our intensive outpatient program. It's for young adults ages 18 to 26 who are struggling with more moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression. Individuals who, you know, once a week therapy isn't necessarily enough and you're needing a little bit more support there. So that's our number that you can call if you'd like an assessment. The Family Resource Center, that's a part of Mission Hospital, offers a life skills workshop for young adults. That's their number there for them. Western Youth Services provides mental health services for low income up to age 21. OCAPICA, I am so sorry, I forget what the acronym stands for. I think it's Orange County Asian Pacific Islander and then I forget what the last two are, but they do offer free counseling for, I believe, up to 10 to 12 sessions, and case management services. So housing services, hooking you up to community resources and things like that, which is really awesome. Free resources there. And then Hidden Behavioral Strength Behavioral Health also provides an independent life skills group for young adults. Wellness Center South, free educational and skill building groups. And then for those of you who either know anybody or are personally involved yourself in any domestic violence, any people who you know that need child protective services, and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, those are all helpful resources for you guys there too. Okay. Any last questions for you guys before we stop this presentation?
Courtney mentioned, what about those 26 and up? So we do have at Mission Hospital a adult program that is for 18 and up, just in general. You can use that Vibe phone number as well, just for that. Vibe specifically is for those 18 to 26. It's a specific program that is geared towards that, but we also have the programs that address 18 up in general as well. Of course. Thank you, Courtney.
So Lisa asks, in your healthcare profession, do you find your colleagues often put aside their own mindfulness self-care for the sake of their patients? Wow, what a great question. I can speak personally for myself where a lot of times it's hard when, there's a lot of things that our patients are going through that we also carry with us, as we work with them. And so it's even more so important to engage in self-care. I do make sure that I try my best to leave work at work, and go home and relax. My favorite things to do is just when I get home is to, just do some mindless Netflix watching, and or like talking to a friend on my way home, Bluetooth, of course, or on the weekends, definitely just spending time with loved ones. That really rejuvenates me a lot. And so, yeah, for me, sometimes it's hard to remember to take care of myself, but at the same time, again, it's about being really intentional about it. And so one thing I suggest for you guys to do is carve out some time every day, like 10, 20 minutes a day to practice mindfulness, or, 2 hours, 3 hours on the weekend. I think it's more effective if you do it like every day, little bits at a time every day, so that you're actually practicing it regularly and you build it into your daily routine.
Robin and Renee, thank you for the questions. Yes, our program at Mission Hospital also is just 18 and up, so that includes seniors. And then, yes, students are eligible for Vibe that go to Saddleback College. So it's anyone that's 18 to 26 can qualify for Vibe. And then, yes, I think that's a great comment, Robin. I think baking is a great mindfulness skill and practice. I personally enjoy cooking as a mindfulness thing that I like to do. So yeah.
All right. Is this an OC Mission Hospital program only? Vibe, correct, is just associated with Mission Hospital. Okay. So we're going to end this presentation. You guys can always email us if you have any other follow-up questions. And this recording, I will try to post it as well. And don't forget to take the survey at the end of this presentation so that you can have a chance to win a $25 Amazon gift card. So thank you guys so much for participating. Hopefully we'll see you guys at the next webinar, okay? Have a good night.